Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. I'm Isabel Wong, a financial journalist who wants to uncover the many Asian stories around us that are waiting to be told. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. On today's episode, we have Richard Lai, the editor-in-chief of Engadget Chinese. Having covered gadgets for over 13 years, Richard joins us to talk about the accident that got him started with his lifelong passion for all things gadget, and where he sees Asian tech will go in the decades to come. Welcome back to Proudly Asian. Now, on this episode, I'm so glad to bring in Richard Lai, the editor-in-chief of Engadget Chinese. So thank you so much for joining us, Richard. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Isabel. Really, I've been looking forward to this day, and I finally made it.
I know. I've been looking forward to chatting with you as well. Like, even before I extended the invitation, I already had the idea that one day I need to get Richard on the show. But I was like, I'm just gonna continue working hard to build the whole portfolio of guests until one day Richard will say yes. And finally, you said yes.
Now you make me sound like a bad person.
No.
Come on.
No, I just wanted to make sure that you were impressed before.
You've been doing a very good job, obviously, and you're one of the top podcasts in this in the Hong Kong region, right? On Apple Podcasts. So, good job.
Thank you so much. And obviously, I've been so curious about, getting your thoughts about tech journalism and also the space that you cover. Because when I started Proudly Asian, one of the spaces that I couldn't help but wondering about was obviously the tech space, because this is also an industry, a space that Asian players have been rising in prominence. So I've always had wondered about whether or not the diversity and inclusion conversation, what people are talking about in that space, and also whether or not the representation part has changed over the years. So glad to have you sharing, some of the observations that you've made over the years. But before we get into that conversation, I think our listeners would like to know a little bit more about you. So why don't we start with your background? Basically, 3 questions. Who are you? What are you? And where did you grow up?
Who am I? That's a very philosophical, deep question, eh? So my name is Richard Lai. I was born and raised in Hong Kong. I did spend like 2 years in Sydney when I was very, very young. Then we came back to Hong Kong. And then at the age of 13, I was sent to a boarding school in the UK. And then I've spent on and off 11 years in the UK up till I went to London for university, for Imperial College in London. But around that time in London, I had the opportunity to join Engadget. So I started my first year and a half at Engadget in London. And then eventually I would come back to Hong Kong. And I also took over the Chinese edition of Engadget. So now I'm both the editor-in-chief of Engadget Chinese, and I'm also one of the senior reporters of Engadget US. So that's pretty much it for me up to this point.
And for our listeners who might be curious about the publication Engadget, tell us about what was the office like in London? Like, I think people might imagine that being the Vogue, but for tech people or like gadget enthusiasts. Is it what it's like?
No, well, here's the thing. We didn't have an office. Well, we didn't go to the office back then. Yeah.
Wow.
So back then it was just me and my ex-colleague Vlad, who's now with Bloomberg. He's done very well for himself. We both just worked out of anywhere. So sometimes I would go to his place. Sometimes we just hang out somewhere. So no, it's not as glamorous as you might have imagined. But we do have an office in London. But I don't know what back then. We didn't work as closely with our mother company. So back then it was AOL. And now we're under Yahoo because AOL and Yahoo merged many years ago. So now in Hong Kong, I used to work out of home in Hong Kong. And then after the merger, I suddenly was told that I should go to the Yahoo office. We used to be in Causeway Bay, and now we're in Quarry Bay,
Mm.
and it's a very you get a very nice view of the harbour from there.
Wow. You started working from home before people even started this whole work from home
Yeah,
arrangement. But I mean, going back to you growing up between Hong Kong, Sydney, and the UK, as a kid, what was the experience like? Did that inform, any sort of decisions that you've made, or, how you identify yourself? And also, at which point did you realize you were actually quite passionate about gadgets?
that's a very good question. So apparently, since since my young age of, I don't know, maybe even at the age of 2, I was already dismantling phones. Like, the back then we had these the cordless phones at home, and apparently I just loved picking out those rubbery buttons. I was pretty much a destroyer of all gadgets back then. But then it got to the point where I started to tinker with the hi-fi audio units, like all those things plugged to the TV. I would somehow find my way around the wiring, or with the cables on the back. I would unplug them, and then I would figure out how to plug them back in to the right places. So I I don't know why. I can't explain like how I developed this passion, if you want to call it. But since then, I just somehow became quite comfortable with tinkering with gadgets to an extent. You know, I mean, that was partly why I chose to study electronic engineering when I went to university. But eventually, I realized that I didn't want to go to that deep of a level. I actually wanted to appreciate the whole package, as a consumer rather than as an engineer. I mean, that's still an excuse at the end of the day, anyway, for why I dropped out. But, but no, I mean, people around me knew I was a gadget, a gadget lover, a geek. So I think I developed most of my true passion for gadgets during my time in the UK at my boarding school, at the secondary school. I had a camera with me. I liked taking photos of pretty much anything. So my friends would be amused by the fact that, oh yeah, of course, there's this Chinese guy with a camera. Yeah, naturally he would like to take photos, just like a Chinese tourist, right? There's that stereotyping there. But I wasn't ashamed of it. At the end of the day, I just said, I just told myself, like, look, someday people are going to appreciate that I took these photos because these are just good memories. But enough about that. I also got into some basic HTML coding, building websites. So I built a website for our house. I built a website for our beekeeping club. I actually did beekeeping back
Wow.
at school. So that's another little fun fact about me. Um, yeah, I had so many of these fantastic opportunities that I volunteered for, and many of which were had to do with tech and gadgets in general. And yeah, I still remember that day when my friends saw that Engadget had an open call, and they all said, "Hey, Richard, you should like submit your application." And of course I did, but I never heard back because back then, they would have received hundreds or maybe close to 1,000 applications back then. But anyway, I was way too young for that. So then I would end up going to university, and I've already mentioned how I dropped out and all that, but I was already at Engadget, so it's all good.
It's good that you were not set back by the first rejection from Engadget.
No, well, I didn't expect much anyway. I knew I still think my writing, there's much room for improvement for my writing, but no, I would have been too young back then anyway.
Mhm.
So it's fine. It's fine. I joined Engadget as a fan. And of course, now I'm working for Engadget as a fan as well, you can say. So yeah, it's all good.
That's the closest to a dream job that anyone could have. But these days, for people who label themselves as, geeks, these days people think they're cool. But back then, when people used to see people who were obsessed with gadgets and, machines and all that, did you experience any negative comments or people are like, oh, what are you doing? Like, why are you obsessed with these things? Like, that's not cool. Or were people already thinking that it was pretty cool back then?
That's a very good question. I mean, it sounds like you're asking whether I got teased or even bullied for what I like.
Hmm.
Again, when we're young, we do silly things. So back then, of course, the I have this one friend. We're still very close friends, and back then he would be like, "Oh, you're a nerd," nah. All these funny little noises and all that. But they didn't mean any harm really, and I just went along with it because it's actually kind of funny, and I was like the geek within my circle of friends. But they did, and they still do come to me for tech advice anyway. So if anything, they actually helped shape me into what I am, perhaps in an indirectly supportive way, perhaps.
Mm.
I never really had people. I never felt attacked on that end. I guess hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found it so encouraging to hear that actually your friends encouraged you to apply for Engadget, which means they endorse and support and find, your hobby and what you love and your passion as something that's cool to them. And you pretty much spent your whole life being passionate about gadgets. So here's a question about what I was going to ask you, or like what would pretty much anchor our discussion today, which would be around the representation and diversity part of the tech industry. Because I'm just wondering, how has representation and diversity evolved in the space of technology and gadgets since you were a kid? Because I don't really know much about this space, but obviously, as a kid, I would remember markets and countries such as Japan and South Korea were already some of the leading players in the gadget space. But I'm just wondering if you also have any thoughts around this.
So it's pretty interesting. Nowadays, if you look at smartphones, I'd say maybe 6 or 7 out of 10 of the major brands you would come across are likely to be Chinese. And there was a time when Chinese electronics had a bad reputation because they were either of not so good quality or maybe they were just straight up rip-offs of the other products from the big players. But then again, Japan went through that same phase some time ago. Sony was actually known for uh, basically copying the product designs from the West, I think. But then they soon started to become very innovative with very unique design to the point where Steve Jobs became a huge admirer of Sony's simplistic designs. Now, of course, there's the modern day Chinese electronic brands. Sometimes they can come up with really truly unique designs. Sometimes they still it's obvious that they intentionally copy some elements from the other big players like maybe Apple or Samsung or whatever. So it does frustrate me when I see comments under my articles about certain Chinese brands saying, "Oh, Chinese companies, they always copy and copy and copy and apparently stealing as well." Sometimes it's true, but I'd like to say it's gotten a lot better these days. But you still get people who are stuck with that kind of mindset from which might have been valid years ago, but they just wouldn't let go.
Mm.
But of course, when they leave that kind of comment, they also have other agenda in mind, like it could be political, or they just don't like Chinese things. So, but as I said, it's gotten a lot better these days because I've been doing this for 13 years now, And I remember when I started off at when I started working at Engadget, there were some Chinese smartphone brands who were obviously blatantly just copying the iPhone or taking some elements out of the iPhone. But yeah, now when we look back, well, some of them have kind of pretty much died off anyway. But those who have survived are doing, I would say, great work. You know, so it's interesting. It's been interesting to see how these Chinese tech brands have evolved, and of course, we have some Chinese tech startups who have been making really truly wonderful products. Like, I hope you don't mind me mentioning, but there's a company called Insta360. They make these 360-degree cameras, and LG and Samsung tried to make something like that. Even GoPro did, Nikon as well, but they've since given up pretty much. So Insta360 is pretty much the only player in that space, and they have long since surpassed what the other brands had achieved back then. So when I see these achievements, it's kind of fun. I mean, I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm like patriotic or anything because that's a whole other topic. But it's good to see um, folks from China making a big difference and setting the record straight, so to speak. And I just wish uh, those haters out there can consider reconsider their position, their stance on how they view things on Chinese tech. Yeah.
Yeah, what you just mentioned there is, essentially the perception of the ongoing progress and innovation that exists in this space. But a lot of the times, these perceptions are pretty much like filtered by personal political agenda or views and all those. It's just very complicated. Which brings me to ask you a quick follow-up question, which you did mention a little bit about, the misconceptions and biases that people have around Asian technologies. But other than, maybe some politically viewed biases, have you also seen any sort of misconceptions about Asian technologies over the years as a journalist in the space?
Misconceptions. I mean, it could be something as simple as misunderstanding or making wrong assumptions of certain specs. So, for instance, very recently, Xiaomi, so that's a very big mobile smartphone brand these days, for those who don't know, they announced that they actually had an ongoing project which would allow you to mount a Leica M lens, like a proper camera lens, onto their prototype smartphone. So, and then people quickly, I received a reply on Twitter from someone saying, "Oh, Xiaomi's lying about the sensor size, and oh, that lens isn't gonna focus quickly, fast enough, or whatever." Uh, and I look at his profile, and of course, he's clearly anti-China and whatever. But in this case, he was wrong on both assumptions, in the sense that, okay, the sensor size, it's called a 1 inch sensor, but that doesn't mean the sensor itself is of a 1 inch dimension. Because when you talk about screens, you say, oh, 14-inch screen is like 14-inch wide diagonally, but that's not the case for this. It's more about the size of the there's some sort of calculation there, but it's an industrial standard in the camera, in the photography world. But that guy's just assuming that, oh, Xiaomi being a Chinese company, of course they're gonna make a lie, make up stuff about this. And then what's the other one? The other one was the focusing. I'm like, dude, Leica M lenses don't have autofocus, so yeah, get real, really, basically. So why, just if you're gonna make an attack like that, at least do your homework first. So that it could be, so going back to your question, it could be something as simple as that. The other assumptions, I mean, obviously when you talk about Chinese gadgets, they would talk about, oh, someone's listening in, be careful of what you say, what you share. They might send the data back to, the central government or whatever. So I'm sure there's some truth to that, especially when you use certain social apps in from China. But at the same time, it's like that doesn't mean the other countries don't have their ways, you know. Or let's put it this way: we use Google, we use Facebook. We don't have to pay for these services. Like kind of still mind blowing when you think about how we rely on so many of these platforms for free of charge. And of course, you know, you look at Twitter now, and Elon Musk is doing his best to make as much money out of this as possible. But you know, I think people take it for granted. You know, take things for granted these days. They're already giving up their privacy by a huge way, and yet they go on and talk about like, oh yeah, don't use Chinese tech because you know someone's spying on you. Hey, you are being spied on. You're typing on this platform. You're posting stuff for free, as in without having to pay to post your comments, your messages and whatever. So I wouldn't say it's a misconception, but more like they say one thing, but without realizing that they're also a victim
Hmm.
based on their own analysis. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so it's a bit contradictory in the sense, and it will be
exactly.
so interesting to observe, like with what Elon Musk is trying to do, whether or not there will be consumer demand, because some of these is pretty much driven by consumer behavior, right? Because if you think, oh, Twitter, I use Twitter because it's free, maybe someone would say that. But then it's like, oh, when you start charging, I'm going to stop using. And at the same time, they are also complaining about privacy and without, realizing that when something is free, then you, the user, essentially are the product. So, I mean, it's actually very interesting to, observe all these views that exist in the online space. But what you just described about the person who commented on your tweet, right? It also made me wonder what's the dynamic like in this gadget space, online communities. Do people who are passionate about gadgets, do they genuinely appreciate each other's interests and viewpoints, or does it tend to be a space where people are trying to one up each other with their professional knowledge?
You mean in general, or when they debate on whether we should use Chinese tech,
Oh, it's not
or
just Chinese tech, but maybe in general. Because I think as an
ah,
outsider, my observation whenever, I scroll through Reddit or, when I look at product reviews, I would
it
see
gets quite toxic.
I would see people
It can get
trying to
toxic.
flex their knowledge, and there would always be people, if one person is expressing excitement about a certain lens or a certain camera, another person will always be like, "Oh, it's not good enough."
How dare you? Yeah, basically, it's more that's more about the commenting culture. You know, there are some people comment because they genuinely want to share their thoughts. They're passionate about this subject. Some people, unfortunately, they go to the comments just to troll people, or they like to troll people because they don't think there's any recourse. I think fortunately on Engadget, unless our articles are about politics, it's usually okay. It's usually okay. Obviously, when things get out of control, I would end up having to drop a comment to say, hey, you know, you're wrong, he's right, or whatever. I haven't had to do that for a while, so I think we've kind of kept things relatively healthy, as long as we're not touching anything political,
Mm.
so to speak. But no, I see what you mean. Yeah, do you? Oh, I do get those on Twitter sometimes. But again, some of those are quite politically sensitive, and some people just, I don't know. They have some things against Chinese brands,
Mm.
and there's nothing I can do about it, really. You know, because there's nothing. It's like I don't want to be the guy who tells him or her that, hey, you know, whatever you're holding in your hand, A, it's most likely made in China. B, there are bound to be some Chinese parts, or at least something that was partly assembled in China anyway. You know, because if I say something like that, then they would automatically label me as a, I don't know, pro-China or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I think I'll let the other people do the job. Like someone will eventually reply him or her saying, "Hey, you're wrong," or "Hey, you know, just calm down." Yeah, no, but I think I've become more immune to those kinds of reactions these days. When I first started, like just a little over 13 years ago, I, yeah, I think back then people were more into commenting. I don't know if it's because of our website or anything, but I feel like maybe nowadays people have shifted towards platforms like Twitter or Facebook to do that kind of commenting. But back then we had way more comments back then, and I was one of them. Before I joined Engadget, I was an active commenter. So even before I joined, there was some Engadget editors already recognized me down in the comments as well. I would say no. It was we try to keep it healthy anyway. You're bound to get one or two bad eggs
Mhm.
in the basket, but no, things are relatively okay.
And I'm not really sure, obviously because of the pandemic, right? I'm not sure in recent years if you got the chance to attend any trade shows or, attend any physical events and really have conversations with actual users and consumers. But I'm just wondering for these days, right? Other than the online crowd, do consumers still tend to have that thinking that maybe like Western technologies are better and more advanced than Asian technologies whenever they make the decision to buy a gadget? Does this thinking still exist these days?
Well, first of all, there aren't that many Western brands left. If you look at, say, smartphones, there's so of course there's always Apple, and if you want something other than an iPhone, then there's pretty much only Google. Even Motorola is a part of Lenovo, which is a Chinese company. So no, you don't get that many choices now. And sure, yeah, you can say, okay, well then I'll stick to Google. But the engineering team behind Google, they are largely Taiwanese because they acquired the team from HTC several years ago. And even the manufacturing, some of the manufacturing is done in Taiwan still, I think, or if not, they're definitely made in China. But I think people who read Engadgets, they are very open minded. And whereas I'm trying to think what my friends think.
Hmm.
It is true that some people actually try to avoid Chinese phones for that reason, which is fair enough. It's their choice. So the only other brands that they can consider would be like Apple or Samsung.
Yeah.
Yeah, Google. That's that. Yeah, surprisingly, there are not that many choices when it comes to where these brands are coming from these days. So no, in fact, some of these so-called Western brands they're known to they have some bad habits, so to speak. Like, for instance, the iPhone. If you take photos of the iPhone and you take photos of people, the iPhones are known to take very realistic photos, so to speak. But I think folks in Asia, especially the ladies, they actually want filtered, beautified photos. I think. I mean, I don't know about you, but like that's the general vibe that I've been hearing, and that's what the manufacturers tell me, and that's why Asian smartphones they came with these pre built-in filters for years ago. So when it comes to that, then okay, sure, maybe some people would rather not pick an iPhone and they would go for the other brands. So that's the Western problem because they think their audience want a realistic photographic outcome. But so that's the cultural clash, maybe perhaps. So when it and then you look at Google. Google's phones aren't perfect either. They had some of their recent phones were launched with many bugs, or quality issues. So
Mm.
no one's perfect. Like Western brands aren't necessarily better. In fact, sometimes they are not. They could be worse than their Asian competitors. So it really, really depends. But I've seen good things and bad things from both sides of the world, so to speak. No, I think when it comes to consumer technology, especially smartphones, it's very much
Mm.
a global market. I personally I don't think about oh, Chinese brands are going to be better. No, I look at the brand. At the end of the day, it's down to people's preferences. Some still intentionally avoid Chinese brands for some reason. Some actually like Chinese brands for reasons like the photography features, the filters, things like that. It really depends on what you're looking for.
It's so interesting what you mentioned about that filtered effect in some smartphones manufactured by Asian brands. It's pretty much like culturally driven when these decisions on product features, and that never occurred to me until you mentioned it. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And also how it's just so funny because essentially this whole consumer gadget space, it serves a lot of people. It's not just, the crowd that's knowledgeable about the technologies, but also someone's auntie, someone's uncle who know absolutely nothing about technologies. And some of their decisions could still be quite subjective. So it's kind of interesting to observe what people prefer and why they prefer a certain product. And at the same time, what you mentioned about whether or not they do upgrades and product features just now, it also made me wonder when it comes to making, product upgrades decisions, do manufacturers and also technology companies, do they hold back on rolling out a certain features, for commercially driven decision? For example, like if I roll out all the features that we could potentially roll out now, then we don't have any upgrades. Do they make decisions based on this thinking, or is this something that they do?
Um, well, one very good example would be 4G and 5G rollout, or even down to 3G rollout for the iPhone. Apple took their time with upgrading their cellular feature for the next generation iPhone. So in that sense, yeah, they do hold back just so they could see how mature the network, the connectivity, the radio technology is. But when it comes to the other kinds of features, it's more about how mature those technologies are. Sometimes the smartphone brands they do pick some really brand new technologies. Not so much as a gimmick, but they want to make it's like a low hanging fruit when it comes to making a selling point, which is like, oh, this is the first phone with super crazy fast charging using 210 watts of power, and you can fully charge your phone within 9 minutes. And that's a real phone. That's from Xiaomi's, the Redmi sub brand. So that actually happens to some phones. They make these special models with that one or two special gimmick. So I don't think they hold back these days. If anything, they're actually trying to throw in as the newest possible, most unique feature to their next new product.
Mm.
So maybe they internally they might have had to cancel some features just to make the deadline. So we as normal people wouldn't know about these features,
Hmm.
or maybe they just cancel a whole product because they think it's not viable, or and no one's going to want that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so in that sense, yes, they do hold back on certain things depending on the situation.
Yeah, it's actually so interesting because I mean I can't think of any examples right now, but then obviously, along the way there would be some products that used to be hugely successful or popular and then they would just decide to discontinue, and some people would be like, I just don't understand why they cancel the product. But there's so much thinking that goes into these commercial decisions. So it's always fascinating to tap into, what they're actually thinking. But going back to the theme of this conversation, obviously, diversity is something that I've been wanting to ask you about in the tech space and also within the tech journalism space. Having been with Engadget for over a decade, have you seen any representation of, Asian tech commentators or journalists much? What does the diversity mix look like in the tech journalism space?
Well, I must say, I'm very fortunate to have come across many Asian tech reporters and tech editors, who and I'm talking about in the West. So they speak and write in English. They present in English. It's I would say it's quite a good mix. Um, uh, one guy, his name is Ray Wong. Shout out to Ray. He, yeah, I think he joined a few years after me. I first met him as at one of those Engadget fan meetup events in. I think that might have been in New York. So he came and greeted me as an Engadget fan, and he was very excited. And now he's become a fellow tech reporter, and it's really good to see him develop his career path in a very, very successful way, and I'm very proud of him. And of course, if you look at the Wall Street Journal, there are so many excellent tech, like real, just fantastic tech journalists. I can't name any names on top of my head, but if you look at them, it's clearly a very, very good mix, both in terms of ethnicity and gender, for sure. So I think we're in a very good position, but I'm sure there's always room for improvement. Like we could use a bit more diversity. Like if you look at our team, then yeah, maybe it's oh no, we have a good mix. We have a good mix. Yeah. Out of all these different the publication worlds, I think in tech we're quite open minded anyway. So we also have we're big supporters of LGBTQ, especially at Yahoo as well. We host many of these workshops and events, activities to show our support to them. Yeah, I'm quite proud of what we as an industry have achieved so far. But of course, like I said, there's always more we can do.
And from your point of view, do you think cultural awareness and diversity also matters in reporting about technologies and gadgets? Some people might assume this space would be a little bit more technical. A lot of it would be more based on the features of this current gadget that you're holding. But does cultural awareness play a part in telling these stories? Are there some stories that, for example, people with Asian exposure or multicultural exposure would be better positioned to tell?
One example I'm thinking of now is the way we talk about the work conditions at large scale factories. So sometimes I worry that the reports out there, they don't paint a full picture of how things operate in China. I'm not saying we should treat those what we've seen recently as a normality, like the Foxconn factory. They had workers climbing over the fence because there was someone got a red code because they were in close contact with COVID-19 patient or something like that. I think some sensitivity is required when it comes to reporting, making those reports. The issue is not just about the Foxconn factory, but it's about the whole country. And it's safe to say the governments over there could have done a much better job at handling these, or setting the rules and whatnot. But I think sometimes when I see that kind of report, they focus so much on just the factories alone, or maybe just that one factory, that they take out the humanity bit. And I don't know. It's too easy of a headline grab or something like that. I feel like maybe if the person who did the report actually knew more about the Chinese culture, it paint a more complete picture to show, to add more respect, to show more sympathy to those who are affected. So of course we can't just assume everyone, we can't just send everyone to China and make them live there for a few years to know what the culture is like there. But I think that's the concern I have from every now and then when I see reports on
Yeah.
that kind of issue.
I get what you mean, yeah, because sometimes Not to say people must speak a certain language to be able to tell the stories out of a certain market, but sometimes having that awareness or having that knowledge about the culture, and when you come across some raw footage and materials and being able to understand what is said in the video, and also the nuance, not just understanding it literally, can make a whole lot of difference, because that will add a lot of important context into the story that you're telling. So yeah, I definitely get what you mean. But as a tech journalist based out of Asia, I'm just wondering, what's your mission? What is the kind of story that you want to tell the world about the Asia tech space in general?
I mean, that's pretty much why I decided to move back to Hong Kong. I mean, I had a fantastic time working for Engadget while in London. And that was how I developed my social skills with other fellow tech journalists and tech PR people. But I'm multilingual. I'd like to think I speak good enough Mandarin these days. And I know my ways around Chinese social media, especially like Weibo. So I felt like I'd be the person to show the world what kind of cool gadgets are coming out of China these days, all these years. And yeah, I've been very fortunate to have met so many companies and tech execs who have been very, how should I put it? They've been very generous in terms of what they want to share with me. So I think, yeah, that's my mission. I'm not. I don't want to sound like I'm just sucking up to Chinese brands or whatever. But I at least I what I can do is I can be the filter. I can pick out the actual good ones and yeah, give them a chance to have a say on this global platform, you know. And in return, so it's a two-way or even a three-way dialogue. So I'd be telling our audience about what's new from China. At the same time, I can tell the product managers or even their bosses in China on like what they can do better, what have they done right or wrong, especially when they're facing the Western markets, because many of those people are obviously quite local Chinese people, so they might not necessarily understand the Western culture. So they might not know why the Western consumers wouldn't appreciate these features, or maybe they would even hate these features. So this is where I would come in. I would have to tell them like, look, I'm like partly Western, you know. I know for a fact that you can't add this kind of feature. They're not gonna like it. It's gonna make them hate your product, blah blah blah. So that's kind of my mission. I tell the world about the latest consumer tech from China, and I also provide some input and help Asian brands or even startups on their product development, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I gotta stay on neutral grounds, of course. But I've been very fortunate on this journey so far, and I've made many good friends,
Mm-hmm.
or at least the people who I would consider to be friends.
And just a quick follow up question, since you have covered both sides of the world in the tech industry, are there any differences in terms of industry dynamics on both sides of the world? For example, I'm talking specifically about the diversity part. Are there bamboo ceilings and glass ceilings? Are these more prominent in either side of the world, or is this kind of like a general industry problem, or it's pretty much the opposite? Like you see a good mix of different people making important decisions in this industry. What's the reality like?
I mean, in the tech world, it's I see many Asian, high level Asian executives. So I feel I want to say it doesn't seem like there's much of an issue, but I'm sure this kind of issue exists. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a term as the bamboo ceiling. In fact, had I not heard about this from you, I wouldn't know that. Oh, there's a bamboo ceiling. There's such a term. Um, I feel like I need to, because like I mainly face Asian companies, so I might not be a good benchmark on this situation, so to speak. But at least I personally know many Asian execs, not just execs, but or maybe high level comms people, PR people. So it's a good mix. there's definitely a strong Asian presence in that space.
Hmm.
So I think in that sense, we're doing okay. But again, I don't want to be the benchmark, and hopefully someone can, hopefully they would shout out and make themselves heard if they do face this kind of issue. We need to know, and we need to support these people.
And I mean, as we mentioned, you've been in this space for over a decade. Can you tell us about one of the most mind-blowing gadgets or your favorite gadget? Tell us about it. Do you have one in mind?
It's not so much a gadget. In fact, it's not something I can keep at home because I would need a fair bit of space. But so Super Mario. I mean, everyone knows Super Mario, and I hope you've played Mario Kart, the video game.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, okay. So imagine playing Mario Kart in VR, and you're sat in a, what do you call those? It's a motion ride. So the whole seat is shaped like a one of those carts, and it simulates the motions as you're racing around. And you're wearing a VR headset. You look around, you see Mario or Luigi right next to you. There's Princess Peach, maybe behind you or something like that. 3, 2, 1, you set off. You have to reach out your hand to hit or grab something from those mystery boxes. If you get a banana, you can literally chuck a banana at your enemies as you drive around. And when you're swirling around, you do feel your ride is kind of shifting around. It feels so awesome.
Wow.
So I tried this for the first time at a VR arcade in Tokyo. It's by Bandai Namco, and using HTC's VR headsets. It's just the best. And that video, I think I had literally millions of views. That was my best ever, most popular video I had ever made. So, we're still, VR is still a growing space, but when you use that at arcade centers, it's just amazing, paired with such a strong IP as well. So I think still up to this date, that's the most mind blowing thing I've ever tried, that I've ever covered.
Wow. I'm definitely gonna go check out the video after this chat.
Please do, please do.
And in 2023, tell us about some of the trends that you are excited about.
So, I currently use a foldable phone. It's the Xiaomi Mix Fold 2, and it's currently I can show you on the camera. It's currently the slimmest large size foldable phone at the moment. And it has a Leica camera as well, because Xiaomi is now they partner with Leica for the photography features. It's slim and relatively light anyway, and very versatile. So I'm hoping in 2023 we'll be seeing more brands making offering similar form factors, at least something as slim as this,
Mm.
because when people look at my phone, they're like, "Oh, is that a Samsung?" And I'm like, "No, it's a Xiaomi." And it is weird that Samsung still hasn't released something anything close to this kind of form factor. Their latest foldable phone is still much thicker and heavier than this. But I think so. If whenever Xiaomi makes something, everyone else using the same supply chain are going to be able to replicate something this kind of form factor. So I think 2023 is going to be the year where we see this kind of breakthrough for foldable phones. And of course, foldable phones have been getting cheaper and cheaper. So yeah, that's the biggest trend that I'm most looking forward to. I think everyone should have something as cool as this. It just it changed it. I'm telling you, it's changed my life. Really, this is like my dream gadget come true. I've always imagined a kind of gadget with a shape shifting screen. So this is the closest thing you can get to that kind of a fantasy, so to speak. Yeah, there's that, and there's also well, people say, oh, metaverse, whatever. Clearly, Meta's not Meta's kind of struggling. In fact, they just announced that they're laying off more than 11,000 employees because the balance sheet's just not doing so well. I don't know. I think there's still a lot of momentum in that space, not necessarily for Meta, but the other metaverse players. So I'm sure there'll be more development on that end next year.
Hmm.
So yeah, these two things. Oh, and VR headsets. We are seeing even more compact headsets now. The slimmer and more portable goggles. Because in order for VR to go mainstream, they need to make these headsets as easy to use as possible.
Yeah.
As easy as us picking up just a phone to make a phone call or video calls. It has to be like that for it to be successful. So yeah, we shall see. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely am looking forward to one day when there's a VR headset solution out there that wouldn't give me headache or
Uh,
wouldn't make me feel dizzy, because these days I think I have one of those Oculus headsets and then I just couldn't really last for half an hour. Like after that, I would just get this like really bad headache.
the longest time I spent wearing a VR headset was like 2 or 3 hours
Oh,
playing some sort of ramen game. I had to serve ramen to these virtual customers.
wow.
Yeah. That was in preparation.
Were you?
That was in preparation for a competition in Hong Kong. But in the end, I failed so badly. Even though I did really well at home, I did a lot of practicing. Oh man, I was obsessed.
Wow.
But yeah, it's VR isn't for everyone, unfortunately. There's the thing. Do you get seasick easily or car sick?
Um, car sick for sure. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So maybe it's that,
Mm,
some people are just more sensitive to
motion.
yeah, yeah.
Right, right. But now I would like to move on to the next segment, which is called Rapid Bias. So in this segment, I'll be asking my guests biased questions they've got asked at some point in life. And in this case, obviously some of the questions that Richard got asked. So Richard, are you ready?
Yeah, I think.
Let's go. First question. You take good photos because you're Chinese.
I just take good photos because I'm good.
Yeah. And next up, school made you the deputy head boy because you're from Hong Kong.
Oh, again, I'm sure I worked my way to that. I was very hardworking, and I like to think that I contributed a lot back to the school's community. So, yeah, you're just jealous.
And the third one, stop promoting Chinese phones on Engadget. I'm not interested.
Just skip to the next article.
Exactly. And finally, you're Chinese, so you must be good at maths.
Not true. When I first went to the UK, I was very good. But then during my last year at school, I was like second to last in my class. So no.
Same here, flopped my maths exam as well, but
Oh, high five.
yay! Thank you for playing this round of Rapid Bias, Richard. And now to wrap up the episode, for those who are curious about your reporting, they would like to keep tabs on, your work, where can they find you?
So I'm on Twitter. I'm at Richard Lai. And I'm also on Instagram. I post a lot of stories these days. So over there, it's Richard Lai HK, HK being Hong Kong. So yeah, feel free to follow me there.
And finally, Richard, what does it mean to be proudly Asian to you?
Proudly Asian. It's all about making sure everyone's having a good time. So to be proudly Asian, I want to share all the happiness or the goodness of the Asian culture to others. And hopefully, in return, they also have a good time as well. And we're all on the same planet, so there's so much that we can learn from each other. And yeah, it's gosh, I don't know why I'm getting emotional just to think about that. To be honest, it's yeah, proudly Asian. It's yeah, yeah. I really don't know how I can answer that properly without tearing up.
There's so much emotions that you're just lost for words, Richard.
I'm lost for words. But to be proudly Asian means, we tell the world, we share the goodness of the Asian culture to the world.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get some love back. Yeah.
And Asian stories matter and Asian stories belong. We should not be just cornered to, a zone or a segment that only Asian audience would care about. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for joining us on Proudly Asian, Rich. It's so great to get your insights about the tech industry and to get your thoughts about the space in general.
No, thank you so much for this opportunity. I mean, I don't often get to talk about these kind of topics, so it's been a very special and quite a moving interview, actually, I would say. So thank you, Isabel.
It was a good chat. That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.